Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Peter Robbins, host of Meanwhile Here on Earth, and you are watching or listening on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. They're in Utah. I am in Ithaca, New York. Today's show is going to be a departure from our normal shows in that the guest is me. I will not go through the pantomime of interviewing myself, but the very first show that I did about 90 shows ago, I decided to do it on my own. And those of you that have some sense of what it's like to be broadcasting, 2 hours can be challenging to fill without anybody to exchange ideas with. And I thought, let me give this a try. One of the things that I had laid out in that first show was things that I wanted viewers and listeners to know about my life. And some of them quite lighthearted, others fairly serious. And that I had lived lives in the New York City art world, off-Broadway theater world, and traveled quite a bit. I think that it's time that I got to share a few stories with you. And the more I thought about it, they kind of divided into a number of areas. One is stories from our lives. The other is in particular stories that happen on the road when you travel, or can happen when you travel. And shameless name dropping between the art world and the theater world, not to mention the wonderful world of UFO studies. I've had the honor of meeting a lot of interesting people. And shameless name dropping is what it would be, although I prefer to call it brushes with fame. But I thought I would start out by showing you a picture. Actually, that is me as I am in my current life, with my assistant, who may or may not visit us during the show, Juno the cat. But let's go all the way back. I often begin by asking my guests about their families. I'm not going to go and ask myself all those questions, but I will share this wonderful photo with you of my parents, Marcy and Alan Robbins, on their honeymoon at a dude ranch in Connecticut, as I recall. And this first story was shared with me with my father a number of times as an adult, always with great humor on his part, enjoying the hell out of it. And it was essentially that he and my mom got married in May. And by December, my dad was still in the service and had not gotten to see his wife and bride for more than half a year. And for a number of reasons, wanted to very much. He asked for a pass to go do this. The war was over. The Nazis would probably not invade New York if he were on his own. Anyway, he was stationed in South Carolina at the time. He was denied that pass, but decided, what the hell, and took off for New York by bus. AWOL, absent without leave, jailable offense. And on the road, realized that there was a tremendous hotel shortage in New York at the time, and called his sister, who recently had been discharged from the Marines, where she had been a truck driver. She had a job as a night clerk at a hotel in New York City on 34th Street and 8th Avenue called the New Yorker. And she was able to find them a room. And as my father delighted in telling me, that is where I was conceived, in the Hotel New Yorker. And as I grew up and learned more about the world, I learned that a man who fascinated me, and probably many of you as well, one of the millennial geniuses whose work, if it had not been repressed, destroyed, or hidden, we would be living in a very different world. And that is Nikola Tesla. Tesla lived out his last years of his life in the Hotel New Yorker. It's true. And although there was some years separating his departure and my arrival, so to speak, I share with Nikola Tesla that common reality of coming and going from the same place at a different time, against the laws of the United States Army. For some reason, that used to make my dad laugh a lot. I think it's pretty funny. But I did stay at the Hotel New Yorker on one night in my life, staying over while I was speaking at a whole life expo that was being held there. And I did give a lot of thought in those several hundred rooms, if that might be the room he died in or I was conceived in. I think really we don't need to do any more tonight. Enjoy the next 2 hours on your own. Just kidding. In thinking about what I want to share with you tonight, I'm a storyteller. They're true stories. And although for some people they sound like fiction, but that is one of the main things I do in life. And I had a chance when I was much younger to strike out on an adventure that grew to be the most extraordinary journey of my life, and set a kind of, set the bar high in terms of adventure, self-reliance, having a better sense of myself as a person in the world. And it began while I was an art student, and that took place in New York City. I loved the arts. I'd been taken to museums since I was a kid. And I, at the same time, was a student at the height of the Vietnam conflict. Like Dick Cheney, like our former president, Donald Trump, I had my 5 full years of student deferments. I valued my education. I did not want to go to war. I did not think it was a fair war or a just one or an honest one. And as much as I wanted to not get killed in a foreign country, I did have very strong moral beliefs about this particular conflict. After 5 years, my number came up in the draft system. I went for my draft physical and I failed it. And I got out of Fort Hamilton very late that night. A bus took myself and other potential conscripts back to Garden City, Long Island, where I got my dad's car and headed back for my parents' house. And at 2 a.m, observed myself just driving past their exit and wondered why I had done it. And 20 minutes, half an hour later, I realized why, as I was parking my car just before dawn under the boardwalk at Long Beach on the south shore of Long Island. And I found myself walking along the beach at dawn thinking, you don't have to go into the army and serve in this war that you don't believe in. It's a tremendous relief. I realized at the same time that I was graduating from art school in a few short months and knew that I was not ready to assume my place in the adult art world in New York City. I needed some kind of coming of age experience to help me grow up a bit and perhaps, see some of the world. I ultimately talked to a great sculptor who I was apprenticed to in the old world sense for several years while I was in art school. And he absolutely understood my situation. My girlfriend, the prettiest, smartest, most talented young woman at the School of Visual Arts, had this crazy dream of actually going on to graduate school and possibly not staying together forever. I still wonder about that sometimes, but we remain good friends. And what Stan told me was, for him, it was the Korean War in the Navy. And did I remember, and he gave the name of an art collector who had his work in his collection that I had met at one of his New Year's parties. And he said he had a partial interest in a steamship firm, and that if he could pull a string or two and get me my Siemens papers or work on a freighter, how would I feel about doing that? I thought, like, that's ever going to happen. And at the same time, I thought, well, Steve McQueen, great film artist, and Jack London, a favorite writer, had both served in the Merchant Marine. When I'm a famous artist, it'll give me a backstory and some colorful history. And I said, sure, knowing that it wasn't going to happen. And about 6 weeks later, I get a call from Stan saying, great news, you are going into the Norwegian Merchant Marine. Well, over the next weeks, I kind of sleepwalked my way through beginning this adventure. I would be working my way across on a freighter to Scandinavia, where I could continue to work on this or other freighters with my papers or whatever. I had no plan, absolutely none, except to get over to Scandinavia, where I had one acquaintance, a psychologist who I'd worked with the year before at a summer camp. I is the art counselor, he is the psychologist. Anyway, one thing led to another, and that September, my sister, Anne, accompanied my dad, who drove me to New Haven, Connecticut, where I boarded my freighter, the MS Saab, named after the automobile. I think Nigerian registry, Panamanian flag, Norwegian company, whatever the arrangement, they moved Saab automobiles from Sweden to America at the rate of about 1,000 per crossing every 6 weeks, and dropped them off at coastal cities along the way. In Morehead City, North Carolina, picked up 500,000 kilos of tobacco, which they brought back to Norway to make cigarettes, went back to Sweden for cars, and so it went. And it was obviously a non-standard agreement. There were a crew of about 30 men, almost all of them Norwegian and Scandinavian of one ilk or another, one Irishman, and me, and another young American working their way across. I was told to report to the captain's cabin. I handed in my passport. He looked at me as though he really wasn't interested in having me on that ship. But he had no choice, and he asked me what I did. I told him I was a good carpenter, I learned quick, I was a good worker, and that I had recently graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York with a certificate in painting. And it was the only time I ever saw him smile. He said, "Oh, you're a painter." Well, the next morning, my very first work assignment was being taken to the paint hold, where I was assisted in grabbing 2 5-gallon cans, bringing them to a point along the deck, where I was then placed on a small wooden platform attached by ropes, with one tied around my waist, and a 5-gallon can of red lead and a big brush, and about a mile off the coast, lowered slowly down to the bottom of a big rust drip, and starting to paint my way up, calling every once in a while when I needed to be hoisted a few feet higher. When it was done, I was moved over to another spot of rust, And the next day I went back with the proper color of the ship's hold and was lowered down again, waves snapping at my feet. Well, not quite, they were a bit below me, and paint out the red lead with the color. Well, it was a great experience as a painter. Soon I graduated to deck work, which was primarily using a giant mop and swabbing the deck. If the weather was rough, you worked for a few seconds, then you went like that. You'd be on the other side, you'd work, you'd go to the other side. Our routines were very regular. We worked for several hours in the morning after a monster breakfast. Monster. Took a coffee break, lunch, more work, coffee break, dinner, monster dinner. 2 nights a week, we got to watch movies, American movies, either dubbed into Norwegian or with Norwegian subtitles, which I preferred. I would ultimately be invited to drink beer with my colleagues, who at first thought it was the strangest thing in the world to find somebody who was just 24 years old and had never crossed the ocean on a ship. Most of these guys had been at sea since they were 13 or 14. At night, sometimes I would go to the front of the ship, especially several days out, when you knew that you were 1,200 miles, 1,400 miles from land in any direction, that the ocean was 2.5, 3 miles down straight, and that at that moment you were the first person on a ship crossing the ocean, as men and women had done for a very long time. Full sky full of stars. Other times I'd stand in the back of the ship and learned for the first time, much to my amazement, that the propellers stirred up these luminous microorganisms. And it would always look like the ship were trailing hundreds of strands of Christmas lights behind it. Every once in a while, there'd be a fight. It was settled almost as soon as it started. These guys worked very hard. And after, a week and a half or so, we came into the North Sea, storms, rough weather, got a cold, ultimately left the ship and took a train across Sweden and got to this little college town of Uppsala, where the only friend I had in Europe lived, who I'd written, but not long enough before I left to get a response. I had a cold. The sun was setting. I went to a phone booth and knew how many Carl-Georg Ericssons can there be in Uppsala, Sweden? And there was 1/4 of a page of them. I was dejected. I was depressed. I was hungry. I was sniffly. I made my way into town. Everybody spoke English, asked where the nearest police station was. Ultimately, I walked in. I knew immediately it was not like any police station I had ever been in, because the only sound I heard besides talking was songbirds. And when I walked to the desk sergeant, his desk was filled with plants. He had a very long blonde beard and hair longer than mine. And I explained my dilemma to him. He asked me what Carl-Georg Ericsson did. I told him I'm a psychologist. In 2 minutes, he found his phone number through the records, called the house, chatted a bit, said, the good news is you are expected. The bad news is your friend is in another part of the country, but he lives in a commune. You will have his room. And so my anchor began in the old world. But I'm not going to dwell on Europe. I want to jump ahead and tell you that I started to drift east with no real aim. I just knew I was on the road. I was alternately elated to have, for the first time in my life, complete freedom, and alternately filled with Jewish guilt that I had left home, left my parents and sisters, all my friends, for no real reason that they could discern, to figure out what I was doing or whatever. And I didn't know any better than they did. But I began to just get deeper into the process of traveling, deal with different problems, situations, advantages every day. Made my way through Eastern Europe, and finally in December arrived in Greece. This is live radio, folks. Forgot to remove the cord. Hello? Don't you love those silent callers? I was told if I ever got to Greece, and maybe some of you were told the same thing, go to the islands, see the ruins. It's such a spectacularly historic and beautiful country. You don't want to miss all the rural beauty. Well, I ended up going right to Athens, falling in love with the city, finding a small rooming house in the heart of it, and within a day realized I could get a hotel room for considerably less that had a balcony and a view of the Parthenon. Anyway, I roamed the city every single day. I did one of my favorite things in cities, which was take a map, get as lost as I could, and then find my way back. But after several weeks, I realized I had kind of hit the mark. I had told my family I'd be gone maybe 3 months, and I had hit that point. And as I came in toward Christmas, I realized, just one country over is Turkey, and a river flows through Istanbul, the capital. Old capital. Flows through Istanbul that separates Europe from Asia. And maybe that's where I should draw the line. Well, to Istanbul I went, hitchhiking out on the very first day of the new year, and made my way to this city unlike anything I had ever seen. I visited the great mosques, the museums, Kapalı Çarşı, which is the ancient covered market that goes on seemingly forever, the greatest market I had ever been to in my life. There was a particular coffee house, cafe in Istanbul at the time, and my friend and colleague, great ufologist and paranormal researcher, Farah Yordzu, tells me that the pie shop, which was the name, is still there. It is still there. And it became a meeting place, well before I arrived, for young Americans and Europeans who were on that ant trail heading east, most of them to India because, hey, it was just after the 60s and India was the place that we had kind of enculturatedly been drawn to, or however you want to say it. And you make friends quickly when you travel like that. Again, this is such a different time. Imagine you are on the road, but that you don't have a phone. You don't have access to any instant information. There, of course, is no internet. You're going completely overland, figuring it out as you go. And if a problem comes up, maybe you can go to the American embassy if it's serious enough, but otherwise you're completely on your own. Anyway, one afternoon I'm sitting in the pie shop and I'm joined by a German couple and we're chatting. One thing quickly leading to another, and they learn that I am from Long Island, New York. And they tell me that they have had learned a few days before that another young American from Long Island, New York, had been caught the month before, I think in September, trying to smuggle some hashish out of the country. Well, if you were smart, or at least not overtly insane, you learned very quickly once you headed into that part of the world which countries you should not even think about any imbibing. And this was one of them. Also alcohol, except at the big American hotels. And the couple told me his name was Billy, and that they had learned that they could visit him. And they did, and they told me the name of the town that he was from, and I thought, that's only a few towns away from me. And that he had been a wrestler in high school. And I thought, we wrestled them. I may have wrestled this guy in my brief but very unillustrious career as a high school wrestler. And they said, you might want to go visit him. That would be, I'm sure he'd be happy to see it. He's got a lawyer. It looks good. Well, some of you may have a hint already, but if you are familiar with the book or the film Midnight Express, this was the young man who was in prison. And being very self-involved, I didn't go. I wish now I had. His story touched me years later when it came out, and all that he had gone through. Anyway, other travelers had joined us at the table, and there may have been a dozen of us. And the conversation fell to, if you could do anything else, anything that you wanted right now, granted that you have some time, and that was something we all did have, where would you go? And everybody agreed they'd go to India. I don't have the number here, 3,000, 4,000 miles away. It's a long way. And again, at the time, none of us were flying. It was just not what we had the money for or what the trips were about. And the evening broke up, but some of us decided, let's come back here tomorrow and continue to discuss this. And the next day, 2 other Americans and a French young man showed up, and the 4 of us continued our conversation. And by the early evening, we had decided that we were going to pool some of our money, maybe $200 each, and we were going to go shopping for a beat-up old Volkswagen camper, spend a couple of $100 on it, make sure that it would run, buy a mattress to throw in the back, basic supplies, and head off for the Iranian border and ultimately for India. Well, isn't that nice? I sometimes think the things that we do, even if we're good kids, that give our parents gray hair. At some point, my parents did receive a letter not long after that to the effect of, Dear Mom and Dad, Helen and Ann, everything's going fine. Guess what? I'm in Istanbul and I've decided to go to India. I bought a van with a couple of guys. I'll be back in less than a year. I'll try to keep up with mail. We wrote back and forth via what they called back then poste restante, which is the main post office in whatever city you designate will hold your mail for X amount of time. Often you got it, sometimes you didn't. The mail that you sent home, sometimes it arrived, sometimes it didn't. My parents could not call me and say, don't do this crazy thing. There was no way to locate me. And so we found a van and we brought it to, well, we had a mechanic look at it before we paid for it. And some changes, some fixing up, bought what we needed and headed east into remote rural Turkey. In the winter, across the great salt desert, ultimately in Iran, having no idea that deserts can be cut to be 30 below at night. I realized almost immediately that although I had made a decision that was going to change my life and hopefully be the beginning of a grand adventure, it was going to cost me in terms of the daily experiences I had started to have just with people that I'd meet. instead of being one young American with a pack on my back, at a time that Americans were welcome in an awful lot of places that they're not so much now. I was now one of 4 white guys in a vehicle, and that changed everything. But we all had this desire to do this thing, and we were going to do it together, or so it seemed. And every night we'd drive as far as we could. We'd switch off. We'd park. We'd get up. We had a little camp stove, fuel, cooking gear, everything you can think of. I was very thankful that I invested in a top-of-the-line down sleeping bag manufactured by some now, I think, long-defunct company in Colorado, a really nice red one. Color coordination was important to me. I was very conscious of a lot of superficial things, how I looked, how I kind of behaved, as a representative of the United States of America. A lot of very affected thinking, and at the same time, more and more realizing I was starting to find I had an identity rather than an aspiring young artist, an American brother. I was becoming a traveler. That was what I was doing, and I was starting to feel more proud of it. I was a human sponge and not missing anything around me. One morning, I remember waking up as usual with my head pulled under my sleeping bag hood, fully dressed, using my fry boots and part of my pack as a pillow. The part of the sleeping bag I was breathing through, the feathers would freeze, and you could go like that and hear them shatter. One eye out, all the screws that were not painted had long hairs of frost growing off of them. On this particular morning, I didn't have the luxury of the gradual getting up and getting out. I heard a very specific noise that woke us all up, the sound of metal on glass. We had curtains all around. I ignored it. The sound happened again and happened right near my window. I got up on one elbow, I looked out the curtain, and I saw the butt end of a revolver. And I suggested to my friends that we all get up and get out. It was a sheep herder with this big, funky, break action, pre-war Webley British pistol, or more likely a very good Pakistani gunsmith knockoff of it. The Pakistani gunsmiths were amazing in terms of reproducing and repairing old weapons. And what my first take was some kind of threat, I immediately saw the situation. There was a patch of maybe 1/3 of an acre of grass, of greenery in the desert, and we had parked on it, and he had sheep. And we got off that patch very quickly. In the evenings, we would stop at cafes, have something to eat. And because the faith did not allow one to smoke tobacco, Muslim men would smoke charcoal. You would literally rent a hookah for a few cents American. A big piece of charcoal would be put on there, and you would smoke. The tips were brass and kept in boiling water until it was time to cool it off and let you use it. One day, we're driving through a very rural stretch of the Great Salt Desert in Iran, and we see a roadblock in the distance. Closer we get, we can see it's military, but that the guys who are pulling the strings and kind of in action are all in white coats over military uniforms, and they stop us. They speak no English. Between us, we speak a very small amount of Farsi or Arabic or even any restaurant and hotel kind of phraseology. But they make it very clear with a small pantomime and a hypodermic needle that up the road, there's problems, obviously of the medical kind. Plague, cholera, what kind of disease? We have no idea. And they're not really interested in telling us. They just have to give us injections of something for something. And of course, in our most vocal, animated English, we protest. We show our passports. We are Americans. He's French, and we don't have to be treated like this, etc. Blah, blah, blah. They look at us and they laugh. And they make it clear with another gesture that we can go that way if we get a shot, or we can go back the way we came through the one road in the Great Salt Desert. We protest again, of course. Nobody's going to inject me with something that I don't know what it is. That's crazy. Well, it was crazy until it wasn't so crazy. And we had places to go. And we rolled up our sleeves, got injected by something. I think the effects have worn off by now. And continued on. Tehran, at the height of the Shah's power, oil-rich, propped up by the American government after a CIA coup. I knew enough about American and Iranian history to know that. But they couldn't have loved Americans more at that moment in time. And now, when we are all too aware of the repressive nature of some fundamentalist Islamic regimes regarding women and their behavior and their freedom, this was a cosmopolitan, modern city with women as indistinguishable from the women that you would see in a nice part of Paris or London, beautifully dressed, no coverings of any sort unless you saw somebody older school in a burqa or whatever, but in all the professions. And I mean, I had never been in a society where it was like the gold rush. There was so much money that one of the cab companies had wanted to negotiate to buy a fleet of new cabs, and the government decided to step in, made a deal with the German government, and all the cabs that I saw were new or like new Mercedes XLs. Guys who were selling newspapers at huge wads of cash. It was quite something to see. Also, the fact that people were much more likely to speak with you and want their children to speak with you because they cared about America. They wanted to go there someday or have their kids practice English. Finally, we get to the eastern border of Iran. Again, kind of a wonderkind at that time in terms of its military. And we cross 100 yards or so of no man's land to the Afghani customs office. I think it was a small wooden building. And as we're beginning to do our work, I realize every place that we've been so far, I have some sense of. Even Iran, Persia, we learned something about all these places somewhere along the line in my formal education, but Afghanistan? And this is the early 1970s. I realized I knew absolutely nothing about it. And the only association I had with the word was Afghans are things that your nano knits you to keep you warm. And Afghans are lovely, smart, very interesting dogs. But otherwise, I was lost. There was a small wood stove in the middle of this room. It was very primitive and kind of cold. The customs people were in no hurry and taking their time. And I had developed a bit of dysentery from something I had eaten. The facilities was an outhouse about 50 feet away. It was very cold out. I was not having a pleasant evening. And I'm back inside now, and a young Afghani soldier sits down next to me, probably a few years younger than me, maybe 18. His uniform differed from the other men's uniforms, and I realized they were all a little different in that their mothers may have made them to spec. But again, they were very funky. But he had a big smile, and Afghani people, very wonderful faces for me. So many of the times that I met them often made me think of an American Indian and a Tibetan and somebody of Chinese descent, kind of combined, and often with the bluest eyes. But he sat down on a barrel next to the chair that I was on and smiled and nodded. Afghan? American? I made it clear that that was yes. Afghan, American, friends? Yes, good. Why not? And he then looked at me and said, in this manner, with this inflection, hashish? I knew enough Farsi and Pashto by then to simply say, no hashish, good American, check bag. He goes, no. Hashish? No hashish. Good American, you can check back. Now he's getting frustrated. He asked me again. I'm getting very concerned. I don't want to do anything that's going to get me in trouble, and I'm not sure how to behave. Meanwhile, I see that I'm one step closer to having my passport evaluated and hopefully stamped. And he stands up, looking very frustrated, reaches into his back pocket, pulls out a 2-ounce disc of hashish and snaps it in half and presses half into my hand. Hashish, American, Afghani, friends. In the customs office? I had no idea that this was completely a nondescript event. There was no laws against smoking or owning or possessing or using hashish in Afghanistan. And my throat was sore, but I thanked him and I started to just nibble little pieces off the edge. Seeing that nobody was rushing toward me with loaded guns, got my passport stamped, and we continue on our eastern way. We are soon in the easternmost city, the westernmost city of Afghanistan, called Herat. And it's now quite late at night, but we can see the hotels are lit up. There's the Bazad, the New Bazad, the Super Bazad Hotel, the Grand Bazad Hotel. We ultimately check into one of the Bazad hotels, being that hotel rooms were only a little more than $50 American each. We each had our own room. We retired for the night. And by this time, I realize I've been nibbling quite a bit of this hashish, and I'm flying like a kite. And that I am elated, not just because I am high, but because I am somewhere I have never been and know nothing about. And it's the beginning of a whole new moment in my life. This has never happened to me. Well, I stay up most of the night just enjoying this moment in time. As the sun starts to come up, I stay at my window and I watch as the street comes to life. Ultimately, we meet up downstairs to go and have some breakfast. And over breakfast, I tell my colleagues that this is as far as I'm going with them, that I'm going to leave them and continue on my own, nothing personal. It's just that this is what I need to do for myself. All three of them made it very clear to me that from what they knew about Afghanistan, that it was a tribal society, that outsiders were tolerated, but that it was fairly basic, that people could be aggressive, that I was going to die and my body was never going to be found, and that we must stay together until we got to India. I said, no, I appreciate your kindness. I also appreciate knowing your finances, that you cannot buy me out of my part of our wonderful vehicle. So, if you could each give me a couple of bucks, basically, we will say our goodbyes and you will be on your way, and then I will too. And they were good guys. At the same time, we said our goodbyes. Pierre lived in Paris. Bobby and I think it was Mike, it's in my notes, lived in Boston, and we never saw each other again. Usually the end of how those stories go. But I was on my own in Afghanistan, and I did a crash course. I went to the library immediately, got the brochures that I needed from the tourist office, and spent a day just reading about the history of the country. It was a kingdom, a very peaceful kingdom, a very tolerant kingdom. I'm sure 98% Muslim, but proud of the Christian and Jewish communities that were there, who were not harassed or hassled, as well as its history going back to as an 8th century Buddhist stronghold. And I just started to get my rhythm there, ultimately knowing that I was going to be in this place called India. And I get to Pakistan. Well, no, in Afghanistan, it's finally time to head to Pakistan. The easternmost city is Jalalabad, which, considering it had been winter since months now, I was very happy to see palm trees and feel a little bit of warmth. I bought my ticket to through the Khyber Pass, glorified in song and legend, and one of the most godforsaken locations I have ever seen or imagined in my entire life. I don't think there was anything green. I looked, my cat. I looked at the plaques as the bus would go by, big brass plaques set into stone, noting that 80 of Her Majesty's Royal Fusiliers laid down their lives on this place, on this date in 1870, or what have you. And as we're going through this area that no one has held, in fact, by joint agreement between the governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan, we understood that it was its own territory. The governments did not mess there. It was held by, well, I won't say pirates, certainly not terrorists, but bandits is the word I'm looking for. And about halfway through, we can see, looking up the aisle, that there are people standing in the road, small at first, getting larger. And finally, they are stopping the bus. They are all armed, bandoleros of shotgun shells, pistols, shotguns, very casual, just basically passing the time of day. They casually surround the bus. One of them steps on, speaks to the driver briefly, smiles and nods to the people down the row, and then starts walking down the row, counting the people on the bus. Because as I'm about to learn, the bus pays a tribute. It's not a stick 'em up robbery. It's an agreed upon cultural agreement. It's paying protection, perhaps, is the way to see it. And the driver gives him an envelope. He counts the money, smiles at us, bids us adieu, and off we go. I was amazed. I will tell you, although we are moving chronologically, almost half a year later, when I returned to Afghanistan, coming back through the Khyber Pass, not only was the bus held up again, it was the exact same guys. We get to Peshawar, Pakistan, and this was one of the rougher days that I had had in traveling. This is me in the summer of 1970. I took the afternoon, it's actually late spring, I took the afternoon off to go to Rockefeller Center to the Passport Bureau to register for a passport and have this picture taken. Passports back then were very different things. Anybody who's old enough to have had a pre-illustrated passport, which came in under President Bush II, with the lovely panoramas of the American plains and the Rockies and things. Passports didn't used to have pictures in them. They had rubber stamps and notations and everything that captured the spirit of this kind of traveling on paper. Some Scandinavian, my Greek entry visa, and this heading to Iran and Pakistan, India, renew India. However, back to where we were talking. Everything was different in Peshawar than in any other place at any other time that I've ever experienced. Every single man that I encountered seemed enraged. I learned fairly quickly, people speak English, that India and Pakistan were very close to war. So close, in fact, that they went to war a week and a half later. And the rage that was being manifested, people on the street arguing together about how India needed to be dealt with. It made me sad in that I was fascinated by what I saw of the culture, but I couldn't stay. And I went to complete my Indian visa and got my photograph taken that day. And to this day, it's one of the most deceptive photographs, I think maybe the most deceptive looking photograph of myself that I know of. I am in complete and total shock. The fact that my face does not betray emotion does not mean that behind those eyes, I wanted to get the hell out of there so quick. I thought that violence might break out around me. And it was just too many people. I lived in New York City. I was born in New York City, 8 million people, 4 million people thereabouts in Peshawar. And all of them seemed to be out on the street at the same minute. And remembering, we look at a black and white photo, we forget that that was a flesh and blood person sometimes, or a black and white movie. I'm not a fan of colorizing, but this was me then. Well, I cross Peshawar. I find myself coming to the border on a bus. I'm with a British guy, a Cockney, the first one I had ever met and encountered in Afghanistan. And he had tried to make this journey several years before. He was a tough kid named Johnny. He had gotten as far as Afghanistan and then developed tuberculosis and had to spend all of his money being flown back on a medical aircraft to England to recover. And it was now 2 years later, and this was a very big deal for him. And it's now later in the afternoon, and I'm going to hold what happens next because I have just blown through our first hour. This is Peter Robbins on the road with you. Meanwhile, Here on Earth is the show. See you in 4 minutes.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting, live Monday night, 7 to 9. If you are enjoying this show, please consider subscribing to KGRA. You can do it by the month, by the year, and if you use my name, Peter, P-E-T-E-R, as your subscription code, you get 30% off. Or just keep listening live. Well, I have now been traveling since September. It is now the first week of February, completely overland, on my own, taking care of things as they need to be taken care of. And I now look at a field about the size of a football field, walking west. To my back are at least 100 armed troops standing at the far end of the field. I think that's an underestimate. Memory is a funny thing, as we know. Myself and this British guy, with our backs to these troops, are walking toward a card table, a simple folding card table at which sits a Sikh Master Sergeant, and that is where we are going to enter India and do our paperwork. Passports, please. All business, looking everything over. The purpose of your visits: tourism, see your country, to learn about your culture. And then he did something that I'll never forget, because in its own way, it was one of the most joyous, unforgettable moments of my life. He went like this, handing our passports back to us, and his face broke into a smile, and he said, "Welcome to India, young men." I have rarely been so quietly elated in my entire life. Sun was going down. How's that for an end of a day? Except that wasn't the end of the day. We both walked some yards. I asked Johnny if he wants to head in town, have a bite to eat, and he said no. He's all business again. I told you I'd only be traveling with you till we got to India. You know, this is my second try. I've got to get out there. Good luck to you. We'll never see each other again. And so we didn't. I walked to an area, kind of an enclave, where there are rickshaws. I have never in my life seen a pole rickshaw. And the thought of it was just as creepy as it could be. Just every kind of elitist, ruling class, racist, humiliating for the person doing the work. But they were the only vehicles that I saw to get to the nearest village, which I understood, I could see it on the map, was less than a mile away, but more than I wanted to trek at that time with a pack. And I start to chat with one of the rickshaw guys, and we settle on a price of whatever it was. The rupee, the standard measurement, currency measurement, at the time I think was only worth about 10 cents, but its buying power with the American dollar was beyond belief as far as I was concerned. For months, I was able to live on less than $1 a day without hardship, and sometimes that included a modest hotel room. That's how different the world was then. And we settle. I am as sure as I can be we have settled. We nod in agreement, and I get in with my pack, and he takes me to the village. No, I take that back. No, he takes me to the village. I get out the currency we agreed upon. I go to hand it to him, and he bursts into a tirade of, no, that's not how much we agreed to. It was double that. Well, very quickly, we escalate our volume. And at the same time, I'm arguing about a very small amount of money for me and not for him. And out of nowhere steps a gentleman, also Sikh, turban, particularly tall for most of the Indians that I would meet, handsome, dressed in a business shirt and tie, and a blazer, a dark blazer. On the pocket was the crest of the International Olympic Committee. And he stepped in and in perfect English asked me what the problem was. And I told him, and he had a chat, a very brief chat with the man with the rickshaw. And I paid him a little more than I thought I had agreed to, but not as much as he was asking. And then the gentleman introduced himself to me. His name was, and I hope still is, Rajinder Singh, Singh. And he inquired about me and what I was doing there. I told him as well as I could. I had just arrived and I hope to see some of the country and learn about it. He said, "This is your very first day, moment, hour in India?" Pretty much. He said, "Well then, you will come home with me and you will spend the night with my family." And we walk. He is a member of the Olympic Committee for India, but he's also a professional photographer and has a shop in town. And we arrive at a very simple house. And he opens the door and says some things in Hindi. And I am greeted by two lovely women, his mother and his sister, who make me feel right at home, show me where I can wash up. And we have a lovely, simple, great Indian dinner together. But I have already noticed that this is a small place and I don't see where I'm going to be staying. And they said, "Oh, just up the stairway. I have noticed that this is a one-story house. You don't need to be an investigative writer to do that." And on good faith, I head up the stairs. I open the door, and on the roof is a bed. And that is where I spent my first night in India. Going to sleep, looking at the sky, amazed that I had done what I had done. I ended up being away from home for a year, a week shy of a year. And I roamed around India for almost 4 months, almost another 2 months in Nepal. I found that there were times that I wished I was with somebody, and other times I was very glad that I was not with somebody, maybe because of something that I was seeing that I thought might be rough on them. The next morning, Rajinder and I went to his studio where he took a formal portrait of me. He said if I exited India by that same village to drop by, because his specialty was hand tinting, old school, black and white, but hand colored in the 19th century manner. Somewhere, I like to think, in the archives of that family, or if Mr. Singh is still alive, I hope so, and still a photographer in his shop, is that picture, which I would love to see. I found that being alone for month after month, I started to take risks that I would never take before, to push harder in ways that were just not really smart, but exciting, and other ways that were smart and that wonderfully beneficial things could happen if I was willing to just go that extra yard. I'll give you an example. Some months later, I found myself in Leningrad. It's now called St. Petersburg. It was before the Russian Revolution, but was Leningrad when I was there. And it was especially important to me because I am mostly Russian American, and I wanted to see where my grandparents got away from. At the same time, the city of Leningrad, St. Petersburg, has one of the most stellar museums in the world, the Hermitage, which is an old Tsarist palace. I thought my life was going to be in the arts, the visual arts, and especially in painting. I lived, ate, and breathed it for almost 15 years in New York City. And it was only investigative writing around the subject of UFOs and my obsession about it that really closed to a good degree that active chapter of my life. Anyway, I got there an hour or two before closing, and all of a sudden the museum is closing and I'm not ready to leave. Well, who cares if you're not ready to leave? You leave. It's a museum, and you're in Russia, for God's sakes. Well, the Soviet Union. I went up to a guard and I said I would like to speak with the director or the highest up person he could introduce me to. He looked at me like, who are you? Brought me up to the front desk, said something in Russian. Man disappeared, came back. Quite a severe gentleman, all business, came out. In English, said, what do you want? I said, in so many words, I am a young American who has just graduated from art school. I am mostly Russian American. I am here to see the country of my heritage. And as a young artist, it would mean a great deal to me if you could let me stay a little bit longer. Can't do this. I said, I may never get here again. Let me show you a letter. Before I left, I went to Silas Rhodes, the founder of the School of Visual Arts and our director. Could talk about him all night. What a colorful character. And asked him to write me a simple letter on the school letterhead to the effect of, young American artist, if you can help him or allow him some access to cultural, it will mean a lot to him, blah, 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 rubber stamp signatures. The letter made a difference. He said, what art do you like the most? And I thought this could be the wrong question for me to answer in the wrong way. For me, it was the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists and that whole European school, which was considered officially degenerate art in the Soviet Union at the time. He nodded, and we started to walk. I followed him. We got to a stairwell. We went downstairs, long, long, long hall, turned on a light, and it was just a long hall of doors. And we walked for a while, and he stops. And it was the only door that I had seen. It was a door-sized door, conventional, but it was a safe door. And he worked the combination, opened it, pitch dark, indicated I should go in, flipped on the switch. I was surrounded by paintings by Matisse, Van Gogh, Gauguin, de Kooning. I was dumbstruck, and I had never seen even a postcard image of any of these paintings because they were either confiscated or never shown. And they sat there as kind of, at that time in the Cold War, as sort of this weird bargaining chip. They were certainly worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but to sell them would be to acknowledge that they had value, and as such, that this degenerate art had value. He let me spent about 5 minutes in there. I will never forget it. Sometimes you just have to ask. In my travels, at a certain point, I realized I was heading back west, and I did not want to travel back the same way I had came. What was I doing for money? Well, I had started the trip with a bank account. I was 23 years old, and I had about $2,000 in the bank. Some of that money from my bar mitzvah presents. I was a saver. I partially worked my way through school. My folks helped me with the rest of it. I had a half scholarship from the School of Visual Arts, worked in the library. I left school debt-free, can you imagine? and a very inexpensive, relatively, education. And I'm now back in the route that so many of these young people like myself were taking, coming and going from India, and just not sure how I'm going to go back, but decided once I was in Pakistan that I would go back by way of the Soviet Union, which I understood was very difficult. They didn't let individual Americans in. You had to be part of a tour. And certainly I was no big shakes that should get any special consideration. But I returned to Kabul, Afghanistan, and one afternoon showed up at the Soviet embassy. When asked what my business was, I told them I wanted to travel through the Soviet Union. And they said, "You cannot." I said, "Can I speak to somebody about this?" And ultimately, I was ushered into an office of an under counsel. Some of you who are film nuts like me may immediately know who the actor Sidney Greenstreet is. British, reserved, wonderfully stout character actor who appeared in a number of films, great films with Humphrey Bogart and Peter Lorre, including Casablanca. This gentleman reminded me of him. You'd never call him anything but portly or stout. He had a great deal of character, and he was wearing what I thought might have been a really expensive double-breasted linen suit, maybe from the 1950s, but that I could see like stains on it, and it had seen better days as he had. And all I could think was, what did you do to get posted to Kabul, Afghanistan? And we started to talk, and he explained to me why it wasn't going to happen. And I explained to him why I really needed it to happen, and that I would agree to whatever terms. He said, you would travel first class, you would stay at a first class hotel, it would cost you a great deal of money. Maybe you don't have it. And we did the adding up. I had it, or access to it, but a week in the Soviet Union was going to cost me the same about as 3.5 months in India. And I had to give all the money over in terms of traveler's checks and cash, which is the way we traveled back then. I didn't have a credit card for many years after that, and certainly not before it. And by the time I left the Soviet embassy, I had these receipts. Back I go to Iran, catch a train to the northern border of Iran, where I'm instructed to get off the train and wait at the abatement. It's basically a long concrete rectangle with enough size and support to have an area where you'd be out of the sun. You were in the middle of nowhere. And it was quite some time before my Soviet train pulled in, during which I thought, I may have a real problem here. But pull in it did. I immediately recognized my car. It was beautiful compared to all of the people's cars. In this classless society, I was traveling not quite like the Tsar, but his second cousin. I find on the side of the car, there is a clipboard with my name on it and only a few others. I step on. Carpeting, all of the glass partitions are etched. The fabric on the seats and the backs are very fine. A beautiful little folding table coming out of the middle. I was going to be on this train for almost 4 days, 3.5 days from the Iranian border to Moscow. And I'm settling in, and I hear a knock on the door, and I open it, and there are 3 gentlemen. One of them is about my height, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, in a Soviet Army officer's uniform with little rimless glasses and a big red cap, red and green, Behind him are two guys who look like they are linebackers. They are, well, everybody's tall to me, but they are really tall. And they are in Soviet military uniforms. And the smaller gentleman, who is obviously in charge and already a bit scary, says, I want you to take all of your things and put them in the hallway. Do not leave anything. I do. And they step in, and in maybe a minute, they pull that room apart and put it back together. Every cushion, pull up the carpet, check this, that, and the other thing in case I've hidden something. Well, it produced the effect that it was after, making me very wide awake and listening to what was going to come next. And it was, the table goes up, he sits on one side, I sit on the other. I want to see all of your papers, all of your money, all of your books. Do not make any mistakes. Well, I only made mistakes in 3 of those areas, the papers, the books, and the money. I knew right off the start I was carrying some paperback books, as we would, that I could get in trouble for. So why bother them by showing them? One was a book that was thrust on me. It was a booklet, really, maybe the most boring booklet ever printed. It was given to me by some communist I got into an argument with in the hotel lobby in the hotel I was staying in Kabul. And it was called Stalin on Linguistics. The other book was The Cancer Ward by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which was banned, way banned in the Soviet Union. As far as the paperwork went, who can keep track of all these things? I had papers stuck here, there, and the other place. I got most of them, but not all of them. Money, yeah, overall, but not that bag of all of the paper money and odd coins from every country I'd been in. That, anyway, the train rolls, and for the next 3.5 days, I roll through Ukraine, the Black Sea resort. I wake up one morning and I see sunflowers growing as far as I can see in both directions. That night, as the sun was setting, both sides of the train, as far as I could see in both directions, sunflowers. No dining car. What do you do besides starve to death? Well, the train would stop maybe 12 times a day at little villages, and the residents would come up to the train with things you could eat. Hard-boiled eggs, mystery meat cooked on sticks, cups of tea, potatoes, not a green thing to be seen, and no fresh water, a lot of tea. I got a good cold going up to Moscow because my car and my compartment were sealed. I couldn't open a window if I wanted to. And there was a family traveling from Iran, Americans. He was an undercounsel at the American embassy, but he was what they used to call a Sovietologist. He's a Russian specialist, and he loved Russia. And the family was taking a holiday there. But he very kindly spent an hour a day with me going over basic Russian language. My grandparents spoke Yiddish if they didn't want the kids to know what they were saying. So Russian was very new to me, and he stressed that even if you use it minimally, pronounce the words right, it was a big help. One afternoon, I'm taking a walk back and forth in my corridor, and I stop and I look into the next car. It's a lot of people on their holidays. It's obviously really hot and sweaty in there on blow-molded plastic seats. And a young man comes to the window and looks at me, maybe a little younger than me. And we just kind of face off with each other. And at a certain point, I don't know why I did it, but I just said, Well, he looked both ways. We opened the door. He came in. We walked over to my compartment, closed the door, and sat down. His first question, like the wonderful soldier in the Afghan passport area, was American? Yes. American. Russian. Friends. Good friends. We shake hands. There's an awkward moment, and then he does something quite wonderful. He reaches into his back pocket, pulls out a big wallet, and takes out the most dog-eared, tired little photo to give to me, for me to see. It's the very first Brian Epstein coordinated in their Edwardian suits of the Beatles. And he then starts to sing a Beatles song. All lyrics right, I know, memorized phonetically, and I start to sing with him. I don't remember what the song was, but I remember when it was over, he started another one and we sang that one. The third one, I decided the song and he sang that one, didn't miss a word. And that was it. At that point, he obviously was starting to get anxious. He could get in trouble. I looked out in the hall both ways. No one was there. Walked him back. We nodded. He went in. After 3.5 days of this, we arrive at the Moscow railway station. I get off the train, and standing in front of my car is a man, maybe 20, in what I can only describe as an inexpensive black suit with a white short sleeve shirt and a thin black tie and sunglasses. He is looking. People are leaving. There's only me left on the platform. He walks up to me and he goes, "Peter Robbins?" I go, "Yes." The look on his face is one of great disappointment. This is not going to be some rich, interesting American. It's just a kid who needs a shower with a pack, still wearing the clothes that he wore in India. And with some disgust, bids me to follow him. We go to a car, a sedan with a driver. And I'm chattering away at him as we're going. He's not saying anything, maybe because he doesn't speak English or not much. And we get to the car. He opens the door. I'm still chatting and assuming he's going to get in, and he doesn't. He closes the door and we drive away. I turn my attention to the driver. Wow, I thought he was going to drive with us. Are you taking me to the hotel? What's your name? Very good. Okay. No English here either. He takes me to the hotel where I check in. I go upstairs and the room is beautiful. The hotel is probably, I don't know, if it's not Tsarist, it's from the 20s. And everything is just so. The bathroom is probably the same size as the hotel room. It has a big standing cast iron bathtub on feet. And I proceed to take maybe one of the most rewarding baths I have ever had in my life. Then I get dressed in clothing I had made to order in Tehran. Only cost a few bucks, even a pair of shoes that I had made to order. I had no Western clothes. And with that, I head down to the dining room with my legally changed money and find a seat, look at the English menu, order a dinner. It comes to about $3.50 in dollars. While I'm eating, I see two very attractive young women walk in who look Chinese. I could only assume they were from China. And they captured my imagination. And the next thing I know, I'm leaving a tip and heading out. And I hear yelling. And everybody turns to look where it's coming from, along with me. And it's my waitress. bringing to my attention very loudly and very angrily that there is a problem. I go back to the table, and even though she does it in Russian, I absolutely understand what I did. I left a tip to ensure promptness, or whatever acronym you like to ascribe to it. That is a Western capitalist thing. She is a worker. She gets paid for her work. Thank you very much. Do you think she didn't want to take that money off the table? Oh my God. But had she done so, she would have gotten in trouble. So I got to be bawled out and got some smiles and laughs for people who obviously knew I had stumbled into this. Left, got a good night's sleep. Next morning, I'm back there and I'm having breakfast. And in come these two very attractive women who I'd noticed the night before, but this time they sit at the table next to me and they start to chat. And I am immediately engaged because they are not speaking Chinese. They are not speaking Russian. They are speaking English, but with a specific English accent that I associate with first generation children of Chinese immigrants living in Chinatown, where I spent a lot of time. And I could not help but introduce myself. One of them was very pleased with the introduction, the other not so much. After breakfast, though, Irene asked me what my situation was. I told her, and she said, I asked her, of course, what she was doing there. A very bright young woman who was on a CCNY, that City College of New York, Russian crash course for 6 weeks. And she asked me if I had been given these chits, so to say, to take the bus tour of Moscow. And I said, yes. She said, forget it. It's dreary, boring. I know the city well enough. Let me take you around. And so we had a wonderful day together. We visited Lenin's tomb, stood online. I got to see the deadest dead guy I've ever seen in my life. Red Square, beautiful in July, but one of the bloodiest spots in the history of the planet in terms of past executions and the like. And ended up making out like teenagers in my hotel room when it was all done, and chatting that it'd be nice to see each other again when she got back, because I would be arriving back in New York before her. And, well, shortly thereafter, we were both back in New York, and she became my girlfriend for the next year or so. This is all leading to one of those moments in life where coincidences happen. I don't believe everything is predestined, but every once in a while something happens and you realize the universe is just tapping you on the shoulder with a bit of a smile to remind you that things are connected and all is not chaos. My girlfriend, who I had been very much in love with, still on the trip as I went, Christine, was, among other things, a very accomplished dancer who had studied ballet when she was young, and when we met, was studying at the Martha Graham School in New York, but went on to, as a very fine painter, to study kabuki dancing with the leading kabuki instructor in America, whose name I will always remember, Madam Mayoko Watanabe, a lovely, graceful, gracious Japanese woman of a certain age who was the master. And I was lucky enough to attend classes sometime. And I'm sure some of you know or remember when you're seeing somebody, especially starting out, you're on the phone, things can get just, what are you wearing? What are you having for dinner? What are you doing? I said, what are you doing, Irene? And she, being a wise guy and thinking I would then ask a follow-up question, said I'm sewing my obi. And I, knowing that an obi is that ceremonial loop of cloth on the back of a Japanese kimono, got to use one of the best lines of my life that I'll never get to use again, quote unquote, and I swear to God, I thought of it. I'm so proud of it. What's a nice Chinese girl like you doing sewing an obi? And she said, I study kabuki dancing. And my blood ran a little cold. I said, Do you study here in New York? Yes. Do you study at the Nippon Club? Why, yes. How would you know that? Is your instructor Madam Mayoko Watanabe? And then she started to get very, what is going on here? Why are you asking these questions? I said, do you know Christine Gilmore? She said, she's my dance partner. What? And I thought, leaving the Soviet Union, I had made 5 wonderful friends. They were all students of engineering or medicine, and they were studying at Moscow University. They were all Africans. They were among the most privileged in their various communities, either the son of leaders or young men who had shown great promise academically. And the Soviets were very, very willing to give anybody who might become a communist and be in a leadership position in their country a very first-class free education. And we became close quickly. These were just wonderful guys who also were very gracious, and who, after, chat as you do, we started to really lock on to each other, and we would be traveling together, leaving the Soviet Union, they on a holiday to the UK, I returning to Denmark, to a family I had stayed with almost a year before, for a nice reunion before heading home. And they made it clear to me that it made them sad. They understood the reasons, that I had not had a good exchange, moment, time, connection with any of the Russian people who they felt were very good people, but, stuck in a political system that you can finish the sentence for yourself. And one night they took me drinking in Leningrad, our last night, and there are no quiet tables in the corner. These are people's bars. They're either long university-style tables or large round tables. And we were at a large round one with an assortment of Soviet citizens, including a pensioner and his wife, a young soldier or sailor and his girlfriend, factory workers, my 5 friends, 3 on one side, 2 on another, drinking the best vodka I had ever had in my life and the worst beer, and knowing I was going to get home just fine to my hotel and that I could actually drink as much as I wanted. Not a big drinker, but I certainly had more than my share that night. And at a certain point, I could see the faces of the Soviet citizens starting more and more to make contact with me in a very favorable kind of way, smiling and nodding as my friends continued to talk about whatever they were talking about. And ultimately, one of my friends leaned over and said, "Peter, do you speak any Spanish?" And I said, "Well, just a bunch of assorted words, but not really. Why?" He said, "Like I told you, we all want you to have a positive experience of the Soviet people. So we have told a little falsehood, a small lie, so you will have this experience." I said, "What have you told them?" "Well, that you study with us at Moscow University, that you are trained to be a physical therapist, and that you're Cuban. Cubans can look anyway. And if you would say something to them in Spanish, it would mean a great deal." They are all now really looking at me, beaming at me. I stand up. I regard them all. I am feeling I'm returning the warmth they're returning to me. And I can't tell you exactly what I said, but it was in the spirit of, "Hasta luego mañana, Chihuahua. Chalupa grande, andale arriba, ole," and maybe a few more Spanish words. Well, everybody stood up at the table. A line formed in front of me, a queue, as they say. Each one of these Soviet citizens embraced me, kissed me on both cheeks, and we continued to drink into the night. It was wonderful. As we are about getting ready to board our ship, I go to change my rubles back into dollars, but I'm informed that when I change the rubles into dollars, in Iran, I had been given wrong information and that I needed to change the rubles into rials, which is the Iranian currency, before changing it into dollars, or they could not honor my paperwork and give me the $150 that I was owed. And I questioned this. They made it clear that I had a problem. And I made a scene. I made a scene. I raised my voice. I yelled. I pulled out my passport. And mid-sentence, I feel weightless. I have been lifted off the ground, hand under each elbow, by two very large guys in suits who take me to another room where they open my pack and they unpack it, and they find papers that I hadn't claimed, a bag of money I hadn't mentioned, 2 contraband books, and they are now telling me in English that maybe I will miss my boat, and it will be 2 days before the next one, and it will be another couple $100 to be spent, and a wonderful man from Intourist, the tour bureau, enters the room, obviously feeling pressure, sweating, and explaining very fast in Russian, I think something like, "This young American is an idiot. Let us let him go. We don't need any extra idiots in the country." One way or another, after tearing the lining out of my beautiful camel skin knapsack that I traded for my old red nylon one in Afghanistan, they allow me to pack and make my way out to my friends again to wait for the boat. I get out there. They are very relieved, and I'm starting to grumble again. I am starting to get pissed off again. And the Intourist man comes up to me and grabs my arm. He says, "You don't raise your voice again. You will not leave." And I said, "I'm just so disgusted. I feel like getting drunk." He said, "You drink?" Those 2 words. I said, "Yes, sometimes." "Why?" He said, "Well, we can direct you over to the souvenir counter where maybe you would want to take home this wonderful these Russian dolls that nest inside of each other and a big set, or perhaps this spoon carved by craftsmen, much too big to use for spoon, but all the beautiful." No. "Well, we can give you alcohol." 5 minutes later, I walk back into the public area with 2 very full shopping bags of vodka, of cognac, of Russian champagne, of Russian wine. And we drank a good portion of it, heading to England. I left a bottle of champagne with my hosts in Denmark. It was a wonderful reunion. Some years later, I returned to Denmark and was back with the same family. We had a wonderful dinner. And after dinner, the father disappears, goes down to the basement, and a minute or 2 later returns with this dust-covered magnum of Russian champagne. Well, we all had a wonderful laugh, and we clean off the bottle, take the wire cap off the cork, push the cork, and the sound that it made coming out was, it was good Russian vinegar, I assume. I decided to leave it and not take it with me. I don't know what I would do, in a way, without knowing that I could always go one more place, that adventures continue, that I was much more fortunate than I could have ever imagined at the time to travel the way I did at that age. It's wonderful to find that you've worked hard, that you have savings, that you have equity, that the person you love and you are on solid financial grounds, and that in your older age, you can get out there and see the world. I haven't been the best planner, so I'm not sure how much of that I'll be doing, but I still get invited to speak at places or jobs that will take me to different locations. And with rare exceptions, I jump at every single chance. I don't know about the rest of you that have been fortunate as I have, or at least somewhat fortunate to see some of the world. But I found that every place I've visited and felt a connection with, that connection stays for the rest of my life. Whether it's something that happens in the political world, something that happens, natural cataclysm, part of me is there. And although I love my country very much, I don't love it right or wrong. America is the best and the worst. We have every variation here, as do really almost every country, but I consider myself a citizen of the world as well as of this particular country. And I would never have it any other way. Also, the world of memory, if we're lucky enough to keep it. The Dalai Lama once said words to the effect of, live an interesting life so that you can relive it when you are older. And boy, if I have one piece of advice to listeners, and we're all coming out of a piece of time, even if we wanted to travel, we haven't. And I understand that there is now a different tone in the world. There's an ingrained reticence to stay home. We all understand it. But if you can, travel, save, go someplace that you've researched. I found it was wonderful not knowing what was going to come next. At the same time, I think if I was going to do it again, I would have educated myself a little bit more on at least some of the places that I visited. I have focused in on a few vignettes from this particular trip, but in future, if you're interested, I can continue stories like this irregularly. Also, take you deep into the New York art world that I knew, some of the extraordinary people I had a chance to work with and spend time with in my life in off-Broadway theater, or just the goofy adventures that I've been lucky enough to have. I mentioned in the promo for this show that for 2 years I was a bonded courier with Lloyd's of London. I was, and specifically moving diamonds in the Midtown area, often to the main post office underneath Rockefeller Center, where they would go out on consignment to jewelry dealers, registered insured, which is maybe the safest way, certainly was for decades, to send anything like that, believe it or not. And I worked for my father, who was a broker, a diamond broker. As he told me when I was very young, it's a lot like working in a bank. You get to handle things that are worth a lot, but they are not yours. But it was a world that was part of my childhood. And at a certain point, he needed somebody to fill this position. And he said, you know, I know you're a responsible gun owner. At the time, I had a fully licensed Colt government 45 automatic and a Walther 38 caliber pistol, a 9mm caliber pistol. And he said, you are now allowed to apply for a carry permit, and you will get it. Are you interested in that? And my first thought was, wow, that's cool. Carrying a gun in New York City? It wasn't cool after one night's sleep. And I went in the next day, and he said, what did you decide? I said, I don't want to carry a gun. He said, that's fine. I would have been fine with either of your decisions, but can you tell me why? I said, yeah. I know if I'm robbed, your insurance could go so high that you could go out of business. That's the nature of the business. He said, that's true. I said, if in worst case situation, somebody did try to rob me on the street, and I am well trained in using my automatic, and I shot them, I would have to live with that. But worse, if I missed them or shot somebody else, I would have to live with that. I could do that easier than watching your insurance premiums go through the ceiling. And so that's why I didn't carry a gun as a courier. I did carry a knife, a very nice one. That was another story. And very accessible, facing down on the left side. I'm left-handed. Be that as it may, I did get to use my handgun once in the course of my work as a diamond courier, which was my father was moving offices, and his safe, manufactured by, I think, the best safe company in the world, John Tan, was disconnected for 24 hours while it was moved from one floor to another. It weighed a ton. And so for one night, there was no alarm system. And I got to sleep on the floor in my sleeping bag with snacks, with a loaded .45 in the office. Fun, good memories. And what a curious note to end on. Again, this is an unusual show. Next week will be more back to norm. We either have interesting individual guests or panel discussions. Next week is a panel discussion. A week from today is Halloween. And we will be having 4 distinguished panelists on to discuss the holiday, all of them highly qualified. I hope you will join us. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. I'm your host, Peter Robbins. Stay well, fight for what you believe in, be kind to each other. We'll see you next week.